Back in the 16-bit era, game companies would slap a license on just about anything in hopes that you kids would rent it for the weekend. But every once in a while, you'd see a game that was so out of place that you wonder how it ever happened. So today, we're taking a look at a couple of licensed games that absolutely should not have existed, and one that, against all odds, showed them all how to do it right. Hey guys, welcome back, and I hope you're all ready for your weekly serving of weird licensed stuff on old consoles, because that's what you're about to get. So sit back, grab a snack, and get ready to get cheesy. First up, let's start off with a real winner. A game where the title is literally just him telling you that he's too cool. Too cool to fool. That's the title, and that's what we're working with here, because it's 1992. That's right, Chester Cheetah Too Cool to Fool for the Super Nintendo came out back in December of 1992. Developed and published by Coleco, it's one of those examples of early 90s corporate marketing logic that's just dressed up as a video game. And no, it is not good. But the story of how it actually came into existence is probably more fun than the game is. Chester Cheetah is of course the mascot for Cheetos, created in 1986 as a smooth sunglass-wearing cheetah designed to make cheese puffs seem cool to children. And for a while it kinda worked. Chester was very recognizable, the commercials were everywhere, and by the early 90s, Frito-Lay had enough confidence in the character to actually start expanding him into other media. In 1992, Chester was actually greenlit for his own Saturday morning cartoon on Fox Kids. Yo, It's the Chester Cheetah Show was in development and everything. And then a little advocacy group called Action for Children's Television stepped in and argued that by giving an advertising mascot his own cartoon show was essentially just giving kids a half-hour commercial, which to be fair is exactly what it was. The show was killed off before a single episode aired, the first time that organization had ever protested something that hadn't even been released yet. So no, Chester never got his cartoon. But he did get a video game though, 2 of them actually. This one in 1992 and a sequel called Wild Wild Quest in 1993. Coleco developed both of them, but the premise here is that Chester has been thrown into a zoo by the villain Mean Eugene, who has also stolen parts to Chester's motorcycle. Your job is to retrieve those parts across 5 levels and finally escape the zoo. And no, it is not a premise that was designed to withstand scrutiny, but for a Chester Cheetah game, sure. The game itself is a side-scrolling platformer, and the first thing that you're probably going to notice is that Chester Cheetah, a cheetah, the fastest land animal on Earth, moves like he's walking through wet sand. There is technically a dash button, but it requires finding a shoe power-up hidden inside the level. And even after you find that, the wind-up that he does before he breaks into a sprint is long enough that you'll overshoot platforms and run into enemies more often than you're going to feel good about. For a game that's supposed to be about this cool, fast character, the experience of actually controlling Chester is incredibly monotonous. The level design across the 5 stages are about what you'd expect, very generic. You're making your way across a zoo, so don't expect much more than your standard zoo stages. There's almost no personality to the enemies that are populating those stages either, and actually jumping on top of them requires you to be surprisingly exact for some reason. Probably because Chester's massive head makes his hitbox the size of a small bus. Each stage, though, has a hidden motorcycle part that you need to find and collect before you can exit the stage. The problem is that the game gives you no real indication of where these parts are in a lot of the stages, so you just end up wandering around hoping that you stumble across them. Like the second level needs you to find this monkey who will then help you reach the part in another section of the stage. Nothing about this is made clear for the player, and it's the only time in the game where this ever happens. Other levels just give you the parts right at the exit, so I'm not entirely sure why they went this route. You do at least get some power-ups, but this may be the only game that I've ever played where the power-ups actually make the game worse. We already talked about the sneakers, but the sunglasses you can find let you see hidden items, which is funny because if you haven't already noticed, Chester's wearing sunglasses already. So apparently these are just special sunglasses. But they also have the side effect of making the screen significantly darker, making the game noticeably harder to see while you're actually using them. The guitar that you can find makes Chester invincible while he jams out, but when he's doing that, you lose all control of him while the animation just plays out over like 5 seconds. There's a section in the swamp stage where you're riding this hippo across the water, and the guitar power-up is directly in your path. Now, in a normal game, that would actually be fun to see, because then you could, kill all the enemies that are coming at you. But in this game, that's the worst thing you could possibly see, because collecting it causes Chester to start playing and then fall off the hippo into the water, and then making you redo the entire thing again. This is just peak game design. The villain, Mean Eugene, and his dog show up periodically as bosses, and they mostly just confuse you as to what you're actually supposed to do. The first boss actually just kind of shows up, wanders around for a bit, and then leaves. You're not even supposed to hit him. Other times, you do actually have to hit him, but the hit detection is so bad that you might not even realize it. The game does occasionally break things up with a vehicle section, but they're about as interesting as the rest of the game is, with you just dodging obstacles until it decides to end. The bird section in the last level is really the only notable one, simply because it's nearly impossible to make it through this thing, easily rivaling the Super NES Rocketeer flying stages as some of the worst on the system. Also, I kind of feel like I need to mention this. If you're wondering why there's no Cheetos in a game that's literally about Cheetos, it's actually because the game was pushing the new, at the time, Cheetos Paws. So literally everything in this game is represented by Cheetos Paws. Chester's health bar are little paws, which means you have to collect the big paws in the levels to refill them. All the smaller paws that you see are just collectibles. It kind of gets confusing. There's a lot of paws in this game. But the game doesn't really make it clear that those are supposed to be Cheetos. They just look like cartoon paws in the game. There's no bags or anything that Chester mentions anyway. So for a piece of product placement that's masquerading as entertainment, it kind of forgot to include the product. Chester Cheetah Too Cool to Fool is not a good game. It's not even entertainingly bad in the way that Toxic Crusaders was last week. What it is, though, is the perfect time capsule. The game sits right at that intersection of everything the early 90s were doing wrong simultaneously. The mascots with attitude trend, the food brand licensing trend, the desperate attempt to make products seem cool to kids who had already figured out that they were being marketed to. Chester never got his cartoon, he just got this instead. And for the kids that actually rented this game back in the day, I kind of wish he would have just got his cartoon instead. But there is proof that stuff like this can work. Cool Spot, the 7-Up mascot game that came out in the same year, is genuinely excellent and worth your time. That one proves that a good developer can take a ridiculous premise like this and make something good out of it. But I guess if you want to peek back in time to a specific moment in gaming history, then this might be worth like 10 minutes of your time. If you just want a good Super Nintendo platformer though, there's about 50 other options within arm's reach. But in the end, it ain't easy being cheesy, and it turns out that making a good game about cheese puffs ain't easy either. And the next game up ain't that much better. In fact, it's worse. How many of you out there are old enough to remember American Gladiators, a show that ran for 7 years and was one of the most unique and recognizable TV shows on at the time? I am definitely one of those people because I am a very old man, but I really like the show. The game, though, is absolute garbage. American Gladiators for the Super Nintendo came out back in 1993, developed by Imagitech Design and was published by GameTech. And it's so bad that one of the UK magazines at the time gave it a 6% rating. At the time, the lowest score that publication had ever handed out. That is a remarkable achievement on its own. There were very few games back then that ever got a review score that low in any magazine. So let's just see how we got to this point in the first place. American Gladiators, the TV show, ran in syndication from 1989 to 1996, and it was fun television if your definition of fun television involves watching a roided-up Nitro absolutely destroy some random schlub from Ohio. The format of the show was pretty simple. Contestants compete across a series of events against the resident gladiators, a rotating cast of professional athletes with names like Ice, Gemini, and Blaze. And then at the end of the show, everyone races through the Eliminator obstacle course to see who wins it all. It was basically the adult version of Guts, just without adults beating up the kids. And you gotta admit that this all looks like prime video game fodder for the time, and it was. An NES game came out in 1991 from Incredible Technologies and took significant liberties with the format. The events were reworked into these side-scrolling and overhead levels that only loosely resembled what actually happened in the show. It wasn't great, but I mean, compared to what you're about to see, it wasn't that bad. The Super Nintendo and the Genesis versions, though, they're the real deal. They arrived in 1993, and the pitch was that these were going to be more faithful adaptations to the TV show. All 7 events, all the real Gladiators by name, including digitized photos of the actual cast, plus a tournament mode for up to 16 players to compete in. On paper, that sounds like a significant upgrade over the NES version. In practice, though, it basically just ended up being a bunch of truly awful mini-games stuffed into a really half-assed game. The Super Nintendo gives you all 7 events. Each one is its own separate minigame, viewed from different camera angles. The problem is that almost every single event is barely playable at best and incomprehensible at worst. Joust, which should feel like a tense back-and-forth duel on a raised platform, has you hitting a button with a direction on the controller which will either move you or make you swing, and sometimes it seems completely random as to what will actually happen. And yes, it feels as bad as it looks. The wall, which should feel like a desperate scramble against a gladiator trying to yank you down, involves just tapping buttons as fast as you can while occasionally getting stuck on a corner for some reason, and then sliding helplessly back down when you get caught. And the iconic Atmosphere event, the one where you're inside a giant rolling ball trying to score goals, is reduced to just slowly rolling around with some really bad physics here. Powerball is the football type event and should have some genuine chaos to it, just like the show. But again, we're stuck with an overhead view here where the AI is so easy to juke that you can basically just score at will if you can press left and then right on the controller a couple of times. Assault, though, is one of the events that actually would have been perfect for a game, since it's literally just hiding behind cover and shooting at a dude that's shooting at you. But the game manages to screw that up with an overhead view that then goes into a behind-the-back view, where you then have to slowly pick up the weapon and use this aiming thing over here to fire it. And it gives you no clue on what you need to do or how you need to aim. You're supposed to score points for hitting different zones on the target, except the game never really shows you anything that you hit. You fire and some numbers change if you get lucky. Whether you hit the bullseye or the outer rim is just information the game's decided that you don't need to see. And speaking of the game giving you absolutely no idea what you're doing, Human Cannonball had reviewers at the time saying they couldn't even figure out how to play the thing. Basically, it has 2 different gauges that instantly start filling. One is your speed and the other is your angle. It's almost impossible to get this right though, since if you're off by just a bit, you're either too slow or too fast. Oh, and don't forget to tuck at the last second. Finally, there's the Eliminator, and this is the one that actually feels most like what these games typically try to do. Just jam left and right on the shoulder buttons faster than your opponent, dodge some stuff, jump over some hurdles, and get to the finish line before your opponent. It's classic Olympic game style button mashing, it's head-to-head, and it's actually kind of fun. Too bad it's over in like 15 seconds. And that is it, diggity dog. There is basically nothing else to this game. Even if you do win, there's no screen or anything like that saying congratulations. You just get dumped back to the menu screen and then realize that you've played the whole game in like 2 minutes. Plus, there's just nothing to keep you going back for anything. It looks crappy, there's almost no sound effects to the whole thing, and you listen to the same 2 music tracks the entire game. They couldn't even be bothered to put in crowd noise into the game, which was so important to the TV show. Here, you get thrown off a platform, it's just silence. You score in Powerball, silence. The show was defined by all the drunks in the crowd and its over-the-top presentation. But the game shipped with essentially none of that. There is a tournament mode that supports up to 16 players, which I guess is kind of an added bonus, with everyone competing across all the different events to finally crown a winner. In theory, this would be a neat little party game, but if you're asking 15 other human beings to sit in a room and take turns playing American Gladiators for the Super Nintendo, people would pay you to leave. American Gladiators on the Super Nintendo is a game that committed to being faithful to its source material, and then forgot that faithfulness to a TV show and actually being fun are two different goals that require separate effort. Yes, all 7 events are here, and yes, the real gladiators are represented, the digitized art is here and all that, but none of that matters when every single event is the opposite of fun. The sad thing is, though, that the show deserved a game that could capture some of its energy. The crowd noise, the drama, that specific joy of watching Nitro take someone out at the knees, that's what we needed. What we got instead, though, was a mostly silent collection of button-mashing mini-games that you can barely figure out how to play. If you grew up watching the show and just want to revisit the game for nostalgia reasons, maybe spend like 5 minutes with it and then go watch actual clips from the show instead. The show still holds up, but this game obviously does not. And I can't believe I'm actually saying this, but if you want a better version of this kind of game on the Super Nintendo, go play Guts instead. And last, but certainly not least, we've got a game based on Ronald McDonald. But before the Genesis kids start screeching and ripping their tits off because this game is even on the list, don't worry, I'm not trying to poo-poo on Ronald here. In fact, it's one of the best platformers on the Genesis, not just a good license game, like one of the best platformers full stop. This is McDonald's Treasureland Adventure. It came out on the Genesis in 1993 and was developed by a little-known developer at the time called Treasure. So yeah, you already know this is gonna be good. But the reason this game is on the list is because it literally should never have been as good as it is. Treasure is probably one of the most beloved game developers in Genesis history. Stuff like Gunstar Heroes, Dynamite Headdy, Alien Soldier. They built an entire reputation for technically ambitious action games that pushed the Genesis in ways that most studios weren't even trying. And they are certainly not a developer that you typically associate with fast food mascot platformers aimed at kids. So here's how that happened. Treasure was founded back in 1992 by Masato Magawa, and I probably just completely murdered his name. But basically, they were a group of developers who left Konami because they were frustrated because they were just making sequels all the time. They had already started work on Gunstar Heroes when they went to Sega looking for a publishing deal. Sega, of course, said no. Treasure had no track record, no released games, nothing to prove that they could actually deliver something. So instead of a publishing contract, Sega offered them a different deal. Develop a McDonald's game for us first and prove that you can ship the product. Then we'll talk about your original game. But Treasure didn't just toss out a throwaway game here so that they could make their own stuff. Instead, Treasure approached it with the same care that they'd give one of Sega's major mascot platformers. Of course, the game is pretty much just your basic platformer though, far more basic than what you're probably used to from Treasure. Essentially, all you're doing is collecting pieces of a treasure map from a trio of villains across 4 different worlds. Ronald himself does have a few things that he can do, like a magic attack that fires sparkly stars across the screen, and a scarf, which stretches out and latches onto hooks that are scattered throughout each level, letting you swing across gaps and pull yourself up to higher platforms. The scarf, though, is the big gimmick here, and the whole game is kinda designed around it. Levels are built to reward experimentation with it, and finding different routes throughout each section is actually pretty fun. And the whole thing just comes together better than what you'd expect from your typical licensed kids game. You can even play a Tetris minigame to earn extra items, and that's just swell. And since this is a treasure game, you know the bosses are probably gonna be the highlight, and they are. Every boss in this game, though, needs to eat one of your jewels that you have before you can actually do any damage to them, which turns every fight into like this 2-stage puzzle of figuring out when they'll steal a jewel and then getting to the point where you can actually do some damage. It's actually a pretty fun little boss mechanic. And you remember how in the Cheetos game that like none of the bosses felt like they should even be in the game? Well, each one here feels like it was designed with actual fun in mind, rather than just dropped in as an afterthought. I mean, it's all really good, but I guess the only real problem with the game is it's just really short. There's only 4 worlds in the game, and each one of them just has a few platforming sections and a boss fight, and that's pretty much it. It probably doesn't help that the North American version defaults to the beginner difficulty, which makes it even easier if you don't realize that. But really, it's not a hard game at any level, so I guess it doesn't much matter. But everything it does with so much fun and polish that the length almost works in its favor. Stages with neat gimmicks come and go without making you tired of it, and it never repeats any of it, kind of making you want to play through it again just to find new ways through them. McDonald's Treasureland Adventure is the best possible version of something that just had no business being this good. Treasure took a corporate fast food license and treated it with complete sincerity, and ended up making a more polished and playable platformer than most studios were making at the time. The scarf mechanic's fun, the boss fights are pretty neat, and the whole thing just looks and sounds really great in that specific Treasure way. But is it Gunstar Heroes level? No, it's not. It's shorter and clearly aimed at a younger audience. As a platformer though, it does sit comfortably in the upper tier of what the Genesis had to offer, licensed or otherwise. It's also just the perfect rebuttal to every lazy license game that we've covered today. Chester Cheetah existed to sell Cheetos and then forgot to be a game in the process. American Gladiators existed to put a logo on a cartridge. But the difference between this game and those other games is because Treasure decided to take it completely seriously, and in the process, made a really great game. If you've never played it, then do yourself a favor and track one down. It's almost certainly the best thing McDonald's has ever put its name on, and that includes the French fries. And that's it for this week, my dudes. I hope you like seeing a little bit of early 90s corporate licensing, because we got it really hard back then. In video games, food, it was pretty much everywhere. But I guess at least advertisers realized that we were kids back then, since it seems like these days, kids are advertised to more as adults than anything else. But I hope you had some fun watching this video, and if you did, then do me a favor and just take a shit all over that like button for me. And if you really got some bad shits, then hit that subscribe button for even more corporate crap aimed at kids in the future. But as for me, I gotta go to the bathroom, so check back next week for another video, and as always, thanks for watching.